Well, now let's take a look at the last couple examples of this particular section. Specifically here, we're going to focus on how exactly we can use our calculator to quickly get a sketch of some of these different sorts of polar curves. To do this, if you have your calculator, let's take a look at how we can switch first to the polar graphing mode. If I click on the mode button that's here, you'll notice again that I may be highlighted on function or on parametric, depending on whether or not you've switched back from the 7.2 video. Now, if I go ahead and I switch over to the polar coordinates, I'll notice that when I hit enter and then hit my y equals button, I'm going to get formulas that are ready to be entered in an r equals sort of a format. Now, of course, if I go back and I look at example number 5, I'll see that my goal here was to sketch the equation of a r equals a 1 plus sine of theta. Now, in order to get theta to be typed in, again, I'll notice that I'll just have to hit this variable button that I normally have. Notice that there are 4 entries here that this variable button can produce. It can produce an x, a t, a theta, or an n. And that's actually perfectly matched up with, if it's a function, input an x. If it's parametric, input a t. If it's polar, input a theta. And if it's SEQ, which you might be able to guess what that stands for, I put an n. So this here, actually this SEQ is something we could have used to graph sequences. So when I go back here, what I would just need to enter is the value of theta. Now if I close this off and I hit the graph button, I should get some sort of a picture. Now these pictures are kind of strange because again I'll notice that they're going to be graphed for different values of theta. So it's as I look down the x-axis and then I slowly turn, I'm plotting points. And so a lot of the pictures that we'll see here will kind of have some sort of circular-ish motion that's going on. Now, we want to understand how the calculator is graphing this and how we might be able to manipulate some stuff. So let's take a look here at this window button. I'll notice first off here that the calculator again is doing the same thing it always does when it graphs. It's creating a table of values, just like we created back in section 7.2 when we were working with the parametric equations. The first thing that the calculator is going to establish is the minimum and maximum theta values that it's planning on using. Notice here it looks like we're going from 0 to 2 pi. Notice if I was to do something like change that upper bound, maybe 0 to pi, so I don't graph for as long, if I re-hit the graph button, I'll see that I'll change how much of the picture that I actually see, because I only graphed points as I turned my head from facing down the positive x-axis, and then I rotated until I stared down the negative x-axis. Now, I'm going to go back and switch this to 2 pi and start to change some of the other features. I'll notice that down here I have my classic x min and x max and y min and y max. Now I'm going to go ahead and just change these up really quick to maybe do something like -3 to 3 for each of these. Of course, what this is going to allow me to do is to maybe zoom in on the given picture that I have so I can see it a bit more clearly. And so here I have this picture, and it's much more zoomed in than before. The final value that I have is this theta step value, and that's a very, very important value. The reason that this theta step value is so crucial is that it is going to dictate to the calculator how many points it's going to be plotting. Notice that the first point that the calculator is going to plot is when theta is a 0. And then it's going to add on this step value and plot another point, and then add on the step value again and plot another point, and add on the step value again and make another point. And by doing this, I can tell it how many points to create. So notice right now, if I keep adding this a bunch of times, it's going to take a long time to get up to 6.28. Notice if I type that as a 1, I'm going to actually be able to get to 6.28 very quickly, which means that the calculator is not going to graph that many points. And when it doesn't graph that many points and then tries to play connect the dots, I get a really awkward looking picture. Now, if I make this value very, very small, like 001, and then I hit graph, I'll see that the calculator is going to take a painfully long time to try to graph this because it's plotting so many possible points. Now, it's possible at this moment in time that you might already be a little frustrated because if you've possibly tried to graph what I've been graphing and you haven't been getting the same picture, what I would ask you to look at is what mode is your calculator converting its angle, or what mode is your calculator in terms of angle measurements. If your calculator is in radian mode, then you will be getting the same pictures that I'm getting. However, if your calculator is not in radian mode, then you may have a slight problem. Take a look here. If I was to go and try to graph the same thing here, and I was in degrees, if I go back and I look at my window, this isn't now 0 to 2 pi. Well, I mean, it's 0 to 2 pi, but not like a full rotation. This is 0 to 6.28 degrees. And so I'm going to increase my step here so this thing will graph a bit faster. But notice if I do this, I'm hardly going to get any of the picture, because there's graphing from 0 degrees to 6 degrees. If I was in degree mode, I have to change this to 360 degrees if I want to kind of graph all the way around. And of course, since my step value is very low, the calculator is going to take a long time to complete this. Okay, I'm not going to go ahead and let the calculator finish all of this sketching because it's going to create the same picture, just make it a lot smoother. Instead, I'm going to go ahead here and let's see if I can get this to stop. There we go. Okay, so you can see here this obviously is creating a much smoother looking picture, but it's just taking forever. So I'm going to go back and switch this back to radian mode. I'm going to, again, as always, recommend you stay in radian mode. If you need to use degrees in your other classes, if you can actually go ahead and see right here above your apps button, there's a menu for angle, and you can actually go ahead and just right underneath there, there's a degree symbol. This is really powerful because it allows you to do something like, say, sine of 30. Well, that's the sine of 30 radians, but if I go ahead and do 30, then click on second and my apps button, and the angle, now I can do sine of 30 degrees. So being able to actually work with these two different types of angles simultaneously is really nice, and I can really only make that work easily from radian mode. Well, let's take a look then really quickly back at the notes to see what example number 6 is going to ask. Can I use my calculator to sketch a graph of this curve? All right, sure, no problem. I'm going to go ahead and change this up. This was just the cosine of 2 theta. If I was to go ahead and take a look at this, I can see that the picture that I ultimately create, I hit the graph button, looks something like this. So I can get a lot of very, very different sorts of shapes. And again, by messing around with my window button, my theta min, my theta max, my theta step, I can really change what sorts or how much of this picture I see and how carefully it's graphed.